Told my family I was fired from a high-paying job and I'm moving in with them because I can't pay the rent, but it was a way to expose their true attitude to me. They said, "We don't need you here without your money." The moment I walked into my parents' house with a duffel bag slung over my shoulder, their faces dropped, not in concern, not in sympathy, but in something else. Something colder. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times, perfecting every detail. The shaky voice, the defeated slump of my shoulders, the sigh that made it seem like the weight of the world was crushing me. "I lost my job," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't afford my rent anymore. I need to stay here for a while." I thought my mother would at least fake some sympathy, but her lips pressed into a thin line. My father, who usually buried himself in the newspaper whenever I came over, finally looked up. Not with worry, with irritation. "How long?" he asked, his voice clipped. My younger sister, Amy, who had always been the golden child, exchanged a look with my mother before rolling her eyes. "Wait, so no more fancy dinners? No more picking up the tab when we go out?" she scoffed. I had spent years supporting them in ways they never acknowledged. Covering bills when they forgot, paying for expensive gifts on holidays, slipping cash into their hands without being asked. And now, when I had nothing to offer, their real feelings were coming to the surface. My mother crossed her arms. "You're saying you can't pay rent, but you can't stay here for free. We have our own expenses, you know." A slow, sinking feeling spread through my chest. It wasn't shock, not really. Deep down, I had always suspected this was how they felt. But hearing it out loud, it was something else entirely. "I just need a little time to get back on my feet," I said, forcing a small, hopeful smile. "Yeah, well," my father muttered, pushing back his chair. "We don't need you here without your money." And there it was. The truth. The ugly, undeniable truth. I had always been nothing more than a wallet to them. A convenient safety net. And now that the net was gone, they didn't care if I fell. I stood there, the silence stretching between us, waiting to see if they'd take it back. If they'd realize what they had just said. But they didn't. They just waited for me to leave. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about losing a place to stay. This was about losing a family I had spent my whole life trying to hold together. But what they didn't know was that I hadn't actually lost my job. And I wasn't here for their help. I was here for the truth. That I stood there for a moment, letting their words settle, feeling the weight of what I had just uncovered. It was one thing to suspect it, to have those nagging thoughts in the back of my mind, but it was another to hear it so plainly. I had spent years trying to convince myself that their love was just unspoken, that maybe they just had trouble expressing it. But this wasn't love at all. This was transactional. I let out a breath, forcing my expression to stay neutral, as if I hadn't just felt my chest tighten in a way that made it hard to breathe. "I get it," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. My mother gave a small, dismissive shrug, as if this was all just another minor inconvenience. My father had already turned away, flipping the TV on like our conversation never happened. And Amy? She was scrolling through her phone, clearly bored. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The way they made it seem like I was asking for the world when, in reality, I had given them so much more without hesitation. The vacations I had paid for, the bills I had quietly covered, the expensive birthday gifts that had suddenly become expected rather than appreciated. I had always been the one to step in when things got tough for them, but the one time I even pretended to need help, I was nothing to them. I adjusted the strap of my duffel bag, keeping my expression unreadable. "Well," I said, forcing a small chuckle, "guess I'll figure something out." Amy looked up then, her brow furrowing slightly. "Wait, so where are you gonna go?" she asked, not out of concern but curiosity. I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe a friend's place. Maybe a shelter." I let the words hang in the air, watching their reactions carefully. Nothing. No flicker of guilt. No second thoughts. My mother simply sighed, reaching for her cup of tea. "Well, you should have saved more money," she said flatly. That was it. That was all they had to offer. I nodded, gripping the strap of my bag a little tighter. "Yeah, maybe you're right." Then I turned and walked out the front door. As soon as I was outside, I let the cool evening air hit me, taking a deep breath. My hands trembled slightly, not with sadness, not even with anger, but with something else entirely. Clarity. The kind that comes when a truth you've been running from finally catches up to you. I wasn't sad. I wasn't heartbroken. I was done. This was exactly what I needed. Proof. And now that I had it, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet, but one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let them use me anymore. I walked down the street, letting my mind race through every memory, every moment where I had ignored the signs. The times I had brushed off their lack of gratitude. The times I had convinced myself that family was family no matter what. But I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. By the time I reached my car, I exhaled sharply and sat inside, gripping the steering wheel. I still had my apartment. I still had my job. And now I had the truth. But the question remained, what was I going to do with it? I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't done yet. I sat in my car, staring at my hands on the steering wheel, the faint glow of the streetlights casting shadows inside the vehicle. My heart wasn't racing, but there was this strange, heavy stillness inside me, like I had been holding my breath for years without realizing it. And now, finally, I had exhaled. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, hovering over a few names. Friends I had distanced myself from because family always came first. People who had invited me to gatherings checked in on me, but I had always been too busy fixing someone else's problems to truly invest in them. Now I was wondering if I had made a mistake. After a few seconds of hesitation, I dialed. The phone rang twice before I heard a familiar voice on the other end. "Whoa, you're calling me. Do I need to check if the world is ending?" I let out a breath of a laugh. "Hey Mark," I said, trying to sound normal. But something in my tone must have given me away. His voice shifted instantly. "What's wrong?" That was the thing about real friends. They could hear the truth even when you weren't saying it out loud. "Not much," I lied, leaning back against the seat. "Just long night." There was a pause before he said, "Where are you?" "In my car." "Are you okay?" I hesitated, then went with the truth. "I don't know." Another pause, but this time it wasn't an uncomfortable one. "Want to grab a drink?" he finally asked. "Or food? Or I don't know, punch something." I let out a small laugh. "Food sounds good." 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a nearly empty diner, the smell of coffee and fried food filling the space. Mark didn't push for details right away. Instead, he let me settle in, taking slow sips of his drink while I picked at my fries. Then finally he asked, "So what happened?" I hesitated, staring at the table before finally saying it out loud. "I tested my family today. Told them I lost my job, that I couldn't afford rent." His brow furrowed slightly, but he let me continue. "They didn't care," I said simply, setting my drink down. "They only cared about what I couldn't give them anymore." Mark exhaled, shaking his head. "I hate that I'm not surprised." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You've always given them everything," he said. "And it's never been enough. I don't know why you thought this time would be different." I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. "Because I wanted to believe they cared about me. Not just my money." Mark was quiet for a moment before he said, "I think you already knew the answer. You just needed to see it for yourself." And he was right. That was the hardest part. The truth had been there all along. I had just been too scared to face it. As we sat there, the weight of it all started settling in. The years I had spent trying to earn their love. The quiet disappointment that had always lingered just beneath the surface. The way I had twisted myself into someone they could rely on, while they had never once done the same for me. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that I had been right, or the fact that I had wasted so much time hoping I was wrong. Mark leaned back in his seat, studying me carefully. "So what now?" I let out a slow breath. "I don't know." "Are you gonna tell them the truth?" I thought about it. About walking back into that house, about watching their faces shift as I revealed that I had never lost my job, that I had never actually needed them. But what would that change? They wouldn't suddenly love me for who I was. They wouldn't regret what they said. They'd probably just get defensive, turn it around on me somehow, make me the villain for testing them in the first place. "No," I finally said. "I think I'm just done." Mark nodded, as if he had been expecting that answer. "Good," he said simply. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't alone in this. I had people who actually cared. People who didn't need some test to prove it. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop chasing after the ones who never did. As I drove home that night, the streetlights casting long shadows across the empty roads, my mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept replaying the moment my father had said those words. Asterisk, we don't need you here without your money. Asterisk, the bluntness of it. The finality. Like it was the simplest truth in the world. Mark had been right. I had known the answer before I even walked through that door. But knowing something deep down and having it thrown in your face were two very different things. And now that I had seen it for what it was, I couldn't unsee it. When I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment, I just sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the building. I still had my job. I still had my place. I hadn't lost anything, except the illusion that I mattered to them. A message popped up on my phone. It was from my mom. Asterisk, are you staying with someone? Asterisk, not, are you okay? Not, we're sorry, just a cold casual check-in, as if making sure I wouldn't become an inconvenience. I stared at the screen for a long time, debating whether to answer. Then before I could stop myself, I typed back. Asterisk, don't worry. I won't be your problem. Asterisk, no response. Not that I was expecting one. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and let out a slow breath. My hands were steady now. No more shaking, no more weight pressing down on my chest. Just a strange kind of clarity settling in piece by piece. But something still didn't sit right with me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about all the years they had taken from me. The years I had spent bending over backward to be the good son, the responsible one, the one who always showed up. The money I had handed over without question. The sacrifices I had made because that's what family does, and now that I had nothing left to give, they had tossed me aside without a second thought. I didn't want revenge. That wasn't what this was about. But I couldn't just walk away without doing something. Without making sure they understood once and for all that I was done being used. The next morning I made a decision. I was going to take back everything they had ever made me feel guilty for giving. Every favor, every loan, every act of generosity they had conveniently forgotten. Not out of pettiness, but because they needed to know that they had lost something too. They had lost me, and this time there was no coming back from it. I spent the next few days preparing. Not for a confrontation. Not for some dramatic moment where I'd lay everything out and watch their expressions shift in horror. No, this was quieter than that. More controlled. I had no intention of arguing, no need to make them understand. They had made their stance clear. But that didn't mean I had to let them walk away without consequences. First, I went through my finances. Over the years, I had covered countless expenses for them. Rent when my parents had fallen behind, my dad's car repairs, Amy's tuition payment she had conveniently forgotten to pay me back for. At the time, I had never seen it as a loan. Family helps family, right? But now, looking at the long list of transactions, the sheer amount of money I had given without a second thought, something inside me twisted. I drafted a formal repayment request. Not a demand, not a threat, just a simple professional breakdown of every payment I had made on their behalf, every expense I had covered, along with a polite but firm request for reimbursement. I wasn't expecting them to pay it back, not really. But that wasn't the point. The point was to remind them exactly how much I had done for them, to put a number on it, to take away the illusion that they had gotten all of this for free. The second step was even simpler. I cut them off completely. I had been the one who always reached out, who always made sure we stayed connected. If there was a holiday, I organized it. If there was a problem, I solved it. If there was a bill unpaid, I covered it. Now, nothing. No texts, no calls, no checking in. Days passed, then a week. Silence. At first, I thought they were just ignoring me, that they had written me off the way they had so easily dismissed me when I stood in their living room. But then on a random Wednesday night, my phone rang. It was Amy. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. And another. Then my mom. Then my dad. Something was wrong. I hesitated for a moment before finally picking up. The second I answered, Amy's voice came through, breathless, frantic. Where have you been? Why aren't you answering? I frowned. I've been busy. There was a pause. Mom and Dad got the letter. I leaned back in my chair. And they're freaking out. They said you're trying to blackmail them or something. Mom's been crying all day. And Dad keeps saying you've turned against the family. I almost laughed. Turned against the family? After everything? I'm just asking for what I gave them, I said calmly. If they can't handle that, it's not my problem. Amy exhaled sharply. Look, I get it. They were horrible to you. I'm not saying they weren't. But you don't understand, Dad's in trouble. I froze. What do you mean? She hesitated. He took out some loans. A lot of loans. I think he used part of the money you gave them to keep up, but now that you're out of the picture, it's all catching up to him. I clenched my jaw. So what? He expects me to come back and bail him out. Silence. That was the answer. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Of course, this wasn't about regret. It wasn't about them missing me or realizing their mistake. It was about money. Again. Amy, I said, my voice steady. I need you to be honest with me. When they said they didn't need me without my money, did they really mean it? Or was it because they thought I had nothing left to give? Another long pause. Then in a quiet voice she admitted, I think they thought you were worthless to them now. There it was. The final piece. I took a deep breath. I'm not coming back, Amy. But I mean it. If they need help, they'll have to figure it out themselves. She was silent for a moment, and for the first time I wondered if she was actually scared. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see the truth too. Then, finally, she whispered, I think they already know that. I hung up. And just like that, the last string connecting me to them snapped. The silence that followed felt different this time. It wasn't the absence of their voices that struck me. It was the absence of weight. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for impact, waiting for the next demand, the next guilt trip, the next way they'd twist things to make me feel responsible for their choices. I set my phone down and stared out the window. The city lights flickered in the distance. Life going on as usual. Somewhere, my parents were probably scrambling, trying to figure out their next move. Maybe my dad was making frantic calls, trying to secure money he didn't have. Maybe my mom was sitting at the kitchen table, blaming me for everything. And Amy? I wasn't sure. I told myself I was done, that I didn't care what happened next. But deep down there was still that small part of me, the one that had spent years believing family was supposed to mean something, wondering if this was really it. Then, a few days later, the final twist came. It was late when my phone buzzed again. Not Amy this time. Not my parents. It was a notification from my bank. A deposit. I frowned and clicked on it. The amount was small compared to everything I had given them over the years, but the sender's name made my stomach drop. Amy. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. A few minutes later, a message followed. Asterisk, I don't expect you to forgive them. I don't even know if I can. But you were right about everything. I wanted to pretend they cared because I was scared of the truth. I'm paying you back little by little. I know it won't fix anything, but it's something. I just wanted you to know that. Asterisk, I exhaled slowly, reading it over again. Maybe I had lost my parents that night. But maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost everything. I stared at Amy's message for a long time, reading and rereading the words, letting them settle in. Of all the outcomes I had imagined, this wasn't one of them. I had assumed she would cling to our parents, defend them, maybe even resent me for walking away. But instead she had done the one thing I never expected. She had admitted the truth. It wasn't about the money. It was about what it meant. She had taken responsibility in a way they never had. Even if it was just a small step, it was hers to take. For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet. But something lighter. I typed out a response. Asterisk, you don't owe me anything. But I appreciate it. I hope you're okay. Asterisk, she responded almost instantly. Asterisk, I'm trying to be. It's weird. Seeing them differently. Realizing how much they took from us. Asterisk, yeah, I replied. Asterisk, it is. Asterisk, she didn't text again after that, and I didn't push. This wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't something that could be wrapped up neatly with a single conversation. But maybe it was a beginning. The days passed, and I found myself adjusting to my new reality. It was strange at first, realizing I no longer had to carry the weight of their expectations, their needs, their constant demands. I had spent so much of my life tying my worth to what I could provide for them that it took time to untangle myself from it. But slowly I started reclaiming my time, my energy, my own sense of self. I started saying yes to things I had always put off. I reconnected with old friends, made plans without worrying about being called away for some family emergency. I focused more on my work, not out of obligation but because I actually enjoyed it. And somewhere along the way I realized I wasn't just moving forward, I was letting go. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It wasn't even about making them regret what they had done. It was about choosing myself for the first time in my life. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, watching the city lights flicker outside my window, I felt a strange sense of peace. I didn't regret testing them. I didn't regret walking away. If anything, I was grateful for the clarity it had given me. I thought about my parents, about what they must be telling themselves now. Maybe they still saw me as selfish, ungrateful. Maybe they thought I had betrayed them. But the truth was, they had betrayed me long before I ever walked away. And now I was finally free. A week later, I got another deposit from Amy. No message this time. Just the quiet acknowledgement of what had been taken, and maybe in her own way an attempt to make things right. I smiled to myself, closed the notification and let it go.